Hey guys, Jeff Francoeur here. Thanks for listening to our content, and please like and subscribe. Jeff Francoeur here with Pure Athlete. Before we get to today's guest, I want to share with everyone that we have our first partnership with Booster. Now, Booster is the high school sports #1 athletic fundraising for teams and groups. And their owner and CEO is a good buddy of mine. Go to church with him and a great guy. And instead of me telling you what it is, I'm going to bring him on. So Chris Carneal, thanks for joining us.
Jeff, thanks so much. So excited to sponsor Pure Athlete. Love your message, love your vision, love the heart and the values behind it. I'm a former college athlete. I'm a coach of my boys and my daughters as well, basketball and baseball. And our company I started 20 years ago, we work with schools, K through 12, and we serve them by raising funds. The past 20 years, we've raised schools, teams, and groups over $600 million, and we want to continue to serve more schools. So if you're interested in hearing how we can come to your sports team, your school, or your group, choosebooster.com.
Again, go to choosebooster.com. Chris, thanks for being a part of this. A big supporter of youth athletics, high school athletics, and we're looking forward to a good partnership with you, man.
Absolutely. Love what you guys are doing. Look forward to serving and helping schools raise funds.
Welcome back to Pure Athlete. I'm Jeff Francoeur here alongside Britt Lee and Brad Williams. I am excited about today, guys.
Super excited.
I am too. You know, we've had a lot of great guests, but this is a personal friend of mine and MLB Hall of Famer. Obviously, we've won a World Series with the Braves, Cy Young, the whole deal. But I think one cool thing that you'll realize about today's guest is he's a great husband, a great father. He was a huge part of my career and a mentor to me. So let's welcome Smoltzy, John Smoltz. Thanks for joining us, man.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me this morning.
Yeah. So before we get going, I know a lot of people know you broadcast too, but kind of what are you up to right now in your life?
Well, brand new hip I'm getting used to, so I'm excited about that. You know, I get back to playing golf and maybe enjoy some pain-free journeys on the golf course, but I'm also getting ready to broadcast the World Baseball Classic, of course, coming up in a couple days. So I'm still busy enough, but other than doing games for Fox on Saturdays, I'm trying to chase around my two grandkids and follow now their sports career when it's beginning at 2 and 4 years old. So I'm having the time of my life.
Man,
awesome.
hopefully the golf game will improve. We'll see how it looks after a new hip, you know. But you know, so we're getting started here. I love to ask this, and I know you're very passionate about youth sports, and you talk a lot about different things. But what was your favorite youth sports memory growing up in Michigan?
Well, for me, growing up in Michigan, unlike some of the other parts of the country, every season was a new sport. And I was just as excited about the new sport I would play. I played baseball, basketball, and football. But I can remember, you know, as a 7, 8, 9-year-old, starting to learn about sports. But there wasn't this craziness of, you know, in Michigan, you can't play all year. So you got to play your sport. And when the season changed, the sport changed. And I enjoyed that so much because until I got to the point where baseball was going to be somewhat of my future when you get towards high school, I think a lot of times, you know, we try things and we think we're going to choose a sport. And ironically, sometimes the sport chooses us, right? You don't know what you're going to grow into or what size you're going to be, but your aspirations are to play whatever sport that you gravitate to, or maybe that you looked to your parents because your parents sometimes drive the sport that you want to play early because of what they know and their passion. In my case, my parents were accordion teachers, so they didn't drive any sport.
Yeah, that's my favorite thing.
It was freedom. You know, it was freedom for me to choose and experience, and baseball became something that I loved. Basketball was my greatest passion. Football was something I could do until it became tackle, and my dad, you know, put the kibosh on that. But it was so much fun growing up where I did. I didn't know any better. I didn't know anything different, but I got to play and didn't get to overabuse any parts of my body for 1 year because you just couldn't in Michigan. You know, football came around, you knew the weather was getting colder. Basketball, of course, was indoors, and baseball, of course, was outdoors.
So, John, what did that look like? You said baseball kind of chose you at some point in high school. When did that happen? Did you play basketball all the way through high school, or give us a little bit more insight into that?
Yeah, I thought I was going to be a basketball player because that's what I enjoyed playing the most. Now, I had to work the hardest at it because fundamentally and just physically, maybe there were some other players a little bit better than me, but I loved the nuances of basketball. And baseball, I guess I had this gift to throw a ball as soon as I would throw it. It came out of my hand different, and my brother couldn't catch me, my dad couldn't catch me, and I had to find someone to catch me. So my good friend Chuck became my personal catcher in the neighborhood. But it wasn't until I knew there was something a potential in when you start seeing. I think parents don't understand your own city. When you dominate your own city, that's one thing, right? But when you start going other places and you start seeing other talents and it starts seeing the difference, how do you make the adjustments as a young kid? No difference than how do you make the adjustments when you're a big leaguer. So travel baseball and playing some of the tournaments, I got to see the talent elsewhere, and it drove me to become better as a baseball player. Basketball kind of ended when I played in the All-State All-Star game when I knew, okay, 7 future NBA guys I ended up playing against. I told my dad, I guess baseball is where we're going to go to college. But I didn't give up the dream of playing both. It's just the draft of baseball in high school took precedent. But I'll tell you this, it was some of my most humbling moments in tournament baseball that taught me I needed to be better. Because if you just stay locally, I was probably better than most. But I remember going to Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and I remember the 4th inning, first time ever seeing radar guns. And I was probably 15, 16 years old, and playing Brooklyn, New York. I gave up 4 2-run homers in the 4th inning. That's pretty impossible to do. And my coach, his name was Javier Cavazos, so he understood the language that was being spoken by Brooklyn, and they were chanting all kinds of things at me. And they basically were telling him to get me Ben Gay for my neck because after every pitch I was looking back to a home run. But I always tell people all the time that was a defining moment for me. When I went home, I told my dad I'm not as good as I thought I was. And I worked even harder to get a little bit better and make the adjustments because I've always been that way, learning from my mistakes or failures. And I think sometimes it suffocates young kids from wanting to, it brings them back a moment, but it should be a motivator to work harder so that, you find ways to get better after those moments.
So when you talk about working harder and thinking about kids today and how they're developing and so on and so forth, I mean, in high school, were you working more on velocity? Were you working, at what point did you start thinking about throwing breaking balls and so on and so forth?
Yeah, so, developmental and genetics are different for everybody. So that answer always is going to be different for me. I know everyone wants an answer on what age do you start throwing breaking balls. It definitely isn't 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. But if at 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, you're throwing a breaking ball, guess what? They're not going to hit it. So if they're not going to hit it, you're going to keep throwing it. A breaking ball has a little less tension and torque on your arm than a slider. I definitely wouldn't allow a young player to throw a slider because that creates a different torque on your elbow. The growth plates and everything about a young boy and a young girl is totally different. So it's not a solid answer across the board. But in high school, I never lifted a weight over 5 pounds. We never had the technology and knowledge and the overkill of information. So it was all about working on my mechanics, throwing strikes. It was never about throwing it as hard as I could. I never threw a pitch in my big league career as hard as I could. The natural ability that someone has is usually and always better than the forced ability or forced velocity that we live in today. So I specifically remember the first time I ever saw somebody do something you shouldn't have. I saw a young man that was in probably a grade below me that his body transformed in 1 year. And he did some things to transform that body because he thought that was the key to throwing harder. And I looked at him and laughed at him because when I saw him, it looked like, he had puffed up, as if you guys know what I mean.
Right.
And there was no evidence that he could throw the ball any harder. So, I think through youth sports and all the efforts of parents, we forget that athleticism, an athlete is genetically gifted. It's not something you can birth, or it's not something you can make. And everyone's trying to get to the top of the sphere, if you will. And there are ways to make everybody a little bit better. But we have to pump the brakes on thinking that everybody can make an athlete or create one. And there are certain genetics that, I'm sure it would be nice if you could inject it or you could teach it, but it's not that easy.
So John, you said that everybody's got kind of like a maximum ability of athletics. So what do you tell parents today in terms of spending money on all these trainers and all these coaches? Are you saying that they really should just kind of let things play out its course as opposed to spending all that money?
Yeah, parents, it's hard to step back and see through a prism through someone else's eyes, right? If you have a lot of knowledge, and Jeff and I play the sport, we have a lot of knowledge to offer. If we stepped in an arena and gave a free clinic today, people would say they don't know they don't know what they're talking about, because time has passed them by. And what I always tell parents is you've got time, because you forget that time is your greatest asset. And you also have resources that are nice, but if you add it up, you basically have paid for the scholarship twice for your young child over the time of your spending them to become an expert in that sport. And it's really amazing if they look back and see all the money that they've spent and to get that scholarship in that particular sport.
Measurables is such, like in our high school, like the college coaches are always, especially in baseball, are looking at measurables. And it's such everybody's shooting for that 90 miles an hour fastball because that seems to be the magic number. Do you believe in measurables? I mean, how important is that versus being just a really, really great pitcher, being a smart pitcher, being a tactician?
I think the biggest thing is chasing the environment that the reward system exists today. And what you said is that's the reward system. They're only looking for velocity. So max velocity is winning out. I think in time that's going to proven that it's a shorter career. And yeah, you can get to the big leagues. But here's the deal. Again, too much technology and too much knowledge poured all in one bucket is not necessarily the end result is going to be great. And so injury rate goes up. The strong survive. I think the player today, if he wants a shot in the big leagues, unfortunately, in my world, he's got to throw the ball, or she, in her sport's got to do things that are far greater than what we're asking our body to do. So I say the measurables is when you're younger, that philosophy stinks. You've got to wait to at least get to high school so your body can catch up. If you're trying to throw the ball as hard as you can as an 8, 9, 10-year-old, chances are you're not getting to high school. And chances are you're going to have a Tommy John, and everyone's going to think that's your greatest gift to an arm to get you to the big leagues. It's all a myth. It's why I spend time in my Hall of Fame speech to try to give parents an insight that doesn't work. Like, you're buying into the wrong theories. So basically you have time. I have this theory. I wish it could be played out. Let's just take Milton or Alpharetta or any city that we have in Georgia, and let's take the top 5 athletes in every sport, and let's take them at age 11, and let's identify the 5 top athletes in each sport. My philosophy is pay that family to not let that child play that sport for 2 years, and my unscientific answer would be in 2 years, at 13, they're still going to be the top 5. They will have lost nothing because they're gifted at 11. They're not going to lose that gift at 13, and they're not going to fall behind the young child that's spending 25 hours a week trying to perform their craft and actually having a greater risk of burnout. So the balance and the timing of when you do things are very important, and we've lost that because the business of baseball, since we're talking about baseball, has makes so much money in youth sports that why would you want to slow that down? And why would you want to have caution flags when you can create more business and more opportunities? And like I said, the strong will survive, but we're weeding out so many other great kids who could either play in high school, play in college, may never play in professional sports, but it can experience that longer than they're experiencing it.
I love that. And we had David Pollock on a while ago,
thinking the
and,
same
and I
thing.
just keep thinking what he's saying, John, what you're talking about is he said you don't really know what you got in kids until they go through puberty, until they get on that other side and see where that, and it just kind of led me into my question that you talked about, so how do you tell coaches, parents that exactly what you said, how much baseball is too much? Telling these parents, have your kids play other sports. They don't have to go out there and hit and play football, but have them play basketball, have them play, I don't run track, but something different to break up that thing. Because it well as I do. They're preaching now, you got to go to these tournaments at 12. You got to get ranked. You got to do this. What do you say to those people?
Before you answer that, let me just add to that.
Yeah.
From two guys who aren't pro athletes, but who've had kids doing it, what parents are thinking is, well, all these other kids are doing it, and my kid's going to fall behind if I don't have him do all these things. So with that caveat, respond to Jeff's question, if you will, please.
Yeah, I call it, it's funny you say that, I call it the Heinz 52. I call it the catch-up theory. And everybody's trying to catch up. And parents have no choice. They're sucked into the funnel of this business. And that's why I wish we could prove to them, if that theory would exist in somewhere, that somebody had the guts to hold their child back and then show everybody why they're not falling back anywhere close to what they would think. And I would say this, every individual coach does their best to try to monitor and really come up with a plan. But when that child's playing for 2 and 3 different coaches and not being honest, or that parent is not being honest with that coach, coaches have they have no choice. They don't know what they're doing would be controversial or bad for the young boy. So it really comes down to the parents having the guts to be honest and say, depending on where you live, that's why we have these issues. I mean, if you go back and look at draft classes in the northern cities, you'd be shocked how many pitchers played longer than people would have thought, because they weren't burned out. They weren't used at a rate that you could say, okay, their shelf life is shorter. Florida, Georgia, the West Coast, the southern part of Texas. I mean, all these states have this burden that you can do it longer, so why not do it more? I just think we're making kids choose too early. And that could be a byproduct of pressure from the parents and a byproduct of the organizations that are working the way they are. I honestly think, and I've heard this kind of answer be debunked, I think Major League Baseball could do a better job going down into the depths of Little League Baseball and creating an opportunity to change those environments. But I wish that coaches had the guts in Little League Baseball to teach more fundamentally and correctness than the sheer ability to try to win at all costs. That is what's really running our kids into burnout at 13, causing them to quit. See, the studies are so rampant and they're so available that no one's even looking at them. More kids than ever at 13 are playing sports, and more kids than ever are dropping out at the same age of 13. We're losing more kids than ever, and the common denominators are pretty simple. Parents and coaches. And those common denominators are either pushing them to do something or driving them to do something that eventually something gives, and the young child says, enough, I can't, it's too much.
Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the mental game, because, you are kind of known for, showing up on the biggest stages and great playoff record. Can you talk a little bit about, how you developed the ability to bring out the very best when the lights were brightest?
Yeah, I have a simple philosophy. It's a little more complex, but for the simplicity of young aspirations, whatever you're trying to do, I believe you got to think it forward, and I believe you got to dream. And I think if you don't do those things and you don't put yourself in positions as a young child, and your imagination's not one that you can see it happen, but actually go out there and be that person, that's what I did. And so as a 12-year-old sitting outside my home, throwing a rubber ball against a brick wall, I pitched 107 games. I was just me and a wall, and I was everything. I was the announcer. I was the star player. I was the GM. I was the grounds crew. I was everything. And the difference in today's world is we don't do pickup. We don't create games outside. Everything has to be organized, and everything has to be a competitive drive, to where now you're kind of separating those kids and that anxiety and everything they're dealing with. But I believe if you're afraid to fail, you'll never be great. And if you don't learn from some of your mistakes that motivate you or gets you outside your comfort zone, But it really starts with the mental preparation of saying, I want to have the ball. I want to be the guy that is in those moments, and then play it forward. And it doesn't always work every single time. But if you're not mentally prepared for those moments in your mind before it happens, then it's going to be more difficult to react to those moments because they're going to catch you off guard. And I promise you, 1991 Game 7 was exactly like it was in Lansing, Michigan, throwing outside my brick wall at home. In every moment, I anticipated that's what I would do. But, life and sports can be cruel. It doesn't guarantee the success, but it prepares you for the moment. And if we've lost the dreaming for our kids because we've been told, or we're telling them this is what you must do and this is how you do it. So we've gapped the time of their ability to go outside and create games and play with their buddies and think about great things. It's all done now in a video game. Their imagination is in a video game. And they're imagining as if their fingers could translate to their brain, which doesn't really translate, in my opinion. It doesn't give you the coordination, but it gives you the sense that, oh, I can be a Jeff Francoeur or a John Smoltz or play the actual figure. You really need to kind of be outside to do those things, in my opinion, but technology's kind of taken over.
John, I know you're very passionate, and we can talk about this another time because this is about youth sports, but about pitch count and how far pitchers can go. So let's talk about that from a youth standpoint, because I know, I'm coaching my kids now, and sometimes I'm sitting here and I'm watching a kid throw 95 pitches at 11 years old, and I'm thinking, first of all, what is the coach doing? Second of all, what in the heck is the parent doing, letting their kids? So what's right for the most part for kids at that age? How many pitches should they throw?
Well, if you could imagine taking away the stress of throwing a ball, which is difficult in competition because you're going to have some stress. If you could take away the secondary pitches and all they threw was a fastball, well, then that number jumps up. But because we don't have those things working for us, I think a big leaguer today, if all he did was throw fastballs, could throw 150 of them. And I'm sure someone's head would fall off if I said that. But the stress of the results is what gets the body in a position for increased injury. In other words, if you're just throwing BP and you don't care about the results, you can do that a lot longer. So the pitch count in baseball and for youth sports is tied to how much stress and what is he doing out there, or what is she doing out there that creates more. So that number gets flexible. To make a carbon copy number of 15 pitches per inning sounds good, but it's not applicable. It's not always the same, because let's say the pitcher is getting out of the bases loaded in the first inning. Well, that adds that take that number down then. Like take an inning down. If he gets out of 2 jams, then maybe take some more pitches down, because he's creating or she's creating the moment that now creates more stress. If it's clean innings and there's not a lot of pitches, then the innings don't matter as much. So it really becomes the eyes of the mechanics. If they're good, no stress, not tired. Those things are a big component that most coaches don't really or are blessed with knowing that. So they go with a number. All right, 75 for 5 innings. That's what I'm going to do. But that 75 could be risky because of what I just said early on, getting in and out of all that trouble.
Yeah.
I think that is why I never liked a certain number. And certainly at the age we're dealing with, if kids threw just fastballs and learned how to repeat mechanics, their stress level and injury rate goes way down. But you throw in sliders and curveballs and bad mechanics, then you're doing a disservice, because the longer they go, the more chance for their injury. Because they love to pitch doesn't mean pitching more is necessarily best for them at that moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, so I was thinking about, we like to ask this, but, growing up in Michigan, what was one of your favorite coaches and why? You don't have to say their names. And then what was your least favorite coach and why? Everybody's had a bad coach along the way, but, give us some examples.
Well, hands down, he's no longer with us. He coached youth baseball for over 55 years. Carl Wagner was the one that I moved to Lansing in 5th grade. And that's where he took me under his wings and taught me the game, had love for the game. And, he just was a man that cared about youth baseball. So he, by far, along with Javier Cavazos, who both have taught baseball for over 50 years. I think the experience I had actually in private school was probably what led me to transfer to public school in my last 2 years. because the politics got involved, and they kind of said that my career was in baseball and I should focus on that. But I wanted to play basketball, and I was pretty good at it. But they kind of saw me as baseball, so they kind of put me in that bucket. And it was a little bit unfair, and it happens, I know. I worked through all the mechanisms, talked to the coach, how do I get better? I didn't just get up and leave. I did all the proper things my dad told me to do. And when at the end of the day, it wasn't going to change much because of the politics, I transferred. So that would be my only bad situation or negative situation. And I turned it into a pretty neat positive, because when I went to the other school, which was a higher qualification, I had the two greatest years of my life in sports, basketball and baseball. And it really prepared me for the future, which was pretty cool.
Awesome. John, moving up to high school, like post-puberty, in terms of going back to arm care, how like a lot of kids, and which is great. My son's a position player in high school, but they're all pitching as well. How does a position player who's never going to be a PO or is never going to be a full-time pitcher, how do they deal with like the year-round training of keeping their arm healthy when they're not really pitching, because they're doing other things like playing third base or shortstop, but they're being called on to pitch? How do they manage arm care during the off season and during the season?
Well, everyone needs a break. So a break's good. A good month or two off of throwing anything is always pretty good. An overhand throw is not exactly the most natural for anybody, but there are ways to do that without the stress of an elbow. You could throw a football. It takes no pressure, unless you're trying to rip it 70 yards. I wouldn't suggest that, but throwing a football takes pressure off your shoulder, helps takes it off your elbow. Anything you have to grip and you have to throw with extension, that's going to create the tension that's not natural. So long toss in the off season. But here's the thing. Long toss can be misleading because people are trying to throw it as far as they can. That's not the definition of long toss. Long toss is throwing it at a higher arc so that you get it to the person without major stress. That is a training off season. I'm not a big fan of it in season, because it changes the release point of a pitcher. But I'm not saying that you can't do it. I'm just saying there are different ways to keep your arm from, it's not going to fall off. But when you pick it back up, there are ways to create that arm strength without doing it all year. Taking natural breaks is good, and allowing your arm to reset. You can do, I'm a big believer of high rep, low weight exercises that are done technically correct. The better you do your exercises versus just slinging weight to get strong doesn't add any value either. So to do the exercises correct without bulk weight also helps, keep the base. And any sport, if you're not foundation from your feet up, you're going to have problems the taller you go, like in a building. If the foundation isn't good, your legs aren't under you, then no matter what you do, you're going to run the risk of having the upper part of your body, pay for your foundation not being in shape or sturdy.
What would you say more injuries, John, are caused from overuse or mechanics?
I think mechanics, because the overuse kind of goes with the mechanics. It goes hand in hand. If I were to flick you on the arm just like this, and you give me 2 days of doing it, and it doesn't hurt, it never hurts because I'm not flicking you hard, but eventually it's going to leave a bruise. And that's the definition I would give bad mechanics. It's like a small little flick. Bad mechanics, you can get it done, but over time, you're going to put yourself in risk. So getting your body under control and learning your mechanics, to me, is way more important than the ability to just throw it as hard as you can. So shorter stints with bad mechanics still lead to a shorter career, and I think that's what they sacrifice something to have velocity. It's rare to have to match the velocity and location. So what baseball's done is they've said, give me velocity. We'll sacrifice location, because if you can get it close enough and throw it with max spin and max effort, then we'll deal with wherever that ball goes because of the style of hitting that exists today. So you have this, you're going to sacrifice something. And so if you can teach a young child, that's why I'm not big on young children pitching so fast, so early, meaning the rush to them to pitch early is kind of a disservice because it's not natural. Remember when it used to be coaches pitch? And then we realized there weren't enough coaches to pitch. And then it became, well, let's just get them out on the mound. Because if you go to a game, I tell parents this all the time, you're basically watching a pitcher and a catcher, and that's it. Because if you have an elite pitcher, they're not hitting. And if you have a bad pitcher, they're not hitting, and it's a walk fest. And it's like you hear all these commands being shouted out by the parents, and in theory, they're trying to give them commands of encouragement where they're really the opposite. Get the ball down. Keep your eye on it. It's all negative shouting that they're thinking they're trying to, get their kids in the right direction. And I ask parents, I say, go to a game and promise me you'll just listen. Don't say anything. First of all, if your young girl or boy is listening to you, then they're in trouble because they're not going to be doing very well. And it's this command shouting kind of like encouragement. And I ask parents, just listen to one Little League game or one soccer game or one basketball game, and you'll be amazed at what gets shouted from the stands by the parents in what they think is an encouragement. And you'd be shocked when you listen to it.
Oh, yeah.
That is so true. I mean, it's a great point.
Hey, John, you talked a few minutes ago about fear of failure. And I just want to talk a little bit about kids learning to overcome adversity and embrace that they're going to fail at times. You go back to your 1991 season, and you had a rough first half, and then you had an unbelievable second half. A lot of people would have cashed it in after the first half. How did you get through that? How did you set yourself up to succeed in the second half of the season mentally?
It goes back to my early childhood. Honestly, I was the smallest kid on every team till my junior year. I grew 7 inches my junior year, and I was I was like a duck. I was the smallest kid with size 12 feet. So something had to give. I was either going to grow into my feet or I was going to flop around. But I've always had this mentality that I'll find a way. It's like I'm in a hole, I'll dig my way out, and that's a good philosophy to have. But there has to be an internal willingness to say that moment that I just went through, I'm a note taker. So I tell parents and kids all the time, aspiration of athletes, take notes. Take time to figure out, what you were feeling like when this happened, and remember it so that the next time it happens, you make the necessary changes to not feel that. And at 1991, I had an opportunity to meet with a sports psychologist. And I think that was like taboo back then. And that everybody has an opportunity to go through slumps, physical slumps and mental slumps. And you'd be shocked how many players go through mental slumps that don't address it. And I think that was the opportunity for me to get out of that funk. Mine was a whole different issue, a philosophy change, a bad contract in the off season, a brand new child on the way. I was a mess with trying to prove things and change my philosophy. So that was a lesson I learned. But I would tell people all the time, if you want to stay comfortable, kids know how to do that when they assess a room, whether it's a classroom, a sports team. They walk in, they know who the best is, who maybe aren't the best, and they're somewhere in the middle. And if you stay there, you'll stay comfortable. And kids are really brilliant at that. That if they don't have that desire to get outside their comfort zone, they'll kind of stay there, and life will be easier, but it won't allow them to be great. They'll just stay right there. If you get outside your comfort zone, you expose yourself to certain things that either will create this tension and you'll run right back in your comfort zone, or you'll move towards that tension. And I think it's a valuable lesson for a lot of athletes to say, you think Michael Jordan and Tiger Woods were always comfortable? There's no way. You think they made every team or made every shot? No way. So they learned from that uncomfortable spot to say, that's going to become my new comfort zone, and I'm going to go learn from that. And I honestly tell you, all the life lessons that I had in sports and baseball came from some of the bigger failures, and it motivated me to make the necessary adjustments. And it starts with your mind. Look, I'm not an expert in this area, but I think when somebody has the yips or somebody forgets how to throw the ball, it doesn't start mental first. It starts with a mechanical flaw that your mind can't conceive what's going on, and then it becomes mental. When you lose the feel and the mechanics of the sport, your brain is trying so hard to figure out, where's the ball? I don't know where the ball is on those 2-foot putts. I hope you've cured them, Jeff. But when you have the 2-foot putt yips, you lose the mechanic of that stroke, and then your brain starts searching. And I think, that's the one area that we don't address enough in sports, the mental. We have all the data, analytics, all the technology. And the last loophole that I think sports can go to the next level is knowing how the heartbeat, how the brain works for the athlete in the big moment. They don't really have that clue yet. It's a wait and see. They see it afterwards, and sometimes it's too late. And if they would dive into that a little bit more and find out about the athlete, because the athlete in general is an insecure vehicle that athletics has filled up that void. And when that insecurity outruns the athleticism, then all of a sudden you have this uh-oh moment. And that's why we're losing a lot of kids early, because they're pushed into that uh-oh moment and they don't like it and they don't want any more of it and they're done. And there's nothing you can get them back to, because I tell parents, you rush a child into baseball, especially a hard baseball, and he gets hit or she gets hit a couple times, it takes a special child to keep going into that box and want to play and get hit, or the fear of that. So don't push them, and invest in them early so that they understand, they got time to navigget that, what I just said.
Is that why you make me putt 2-footers? Because I'm going to miss about one out of 4.
It's for your own benefit. And when you get over this early,
It's all for you.
I think it's for your wallet's benefit. He won't say it. But now, so I'm going to give you the opportunity. Line it up for a minute. One of the biggest failures or most humbling experience of my life was with John, and on a golf course.
Yeah.
And I don't think these two know, so I'll give you 1 minute to tell the story.
All right. So basically, you guys know Jeff and how eager he is to do things and excited, and he loves what he's doing. Well, he wanted to beat me in golf so bad, and we would have a bunch of matches, and he was starting to gain traction, but all he wanted to do was beat me once. And, it's kind of like I'm the tortoise, he's the hare, and he's bowling, in a china shop, but it's fine because he crushes the golf ball. It's not even close to where I can hit the ball. Well, this one particular day, he put his arm around me going into the 18th hole. I think he had a 5 or 6 shot lead, and the 18th hole is a par 5. And he goes, "Old man, I finally got you today." And what he didn't tell me was what he had planned already and the 17th hole to do in the clubhouse the next day. So he already thought it forward, and he finished the process before you. That's a no-no.
Visualizing.
And so he goes, and I said to him, "Yeah, you played well today, kid. We got 1 hole to go." Well, I won't give you all the details, but he did make a 14 on that hole. And I made a 4. So he went from up 5 to down 5. And what he didn't even realize in the moment, and it was probably unfair for me to do, I made him replay it because I purposely said he made a 15. And he was like, "No, I didn't. I made a 14. I said, "Let's go over it again. 1 off the tee, 3 off the tee." I did it 3 times.
He did.
And obviously, he did eventually beat me at Seminole and jump in the ocean. So he got his wish. But that moment was exactly what sometimes you go through. And it's a that was a very humbling
Oh,
moment.
my gosh. And the worst case, so I told who we were playing with, Adam LaRoche, and I told him that I was going to take the scorecard in, print them out, and hang them all over the locker room at spring training. And the worst part was the next day, John didn't say a word to anybody. So I'm walking in, I'm just waiting for people to say that, and they're not. So that almost bothered me more, but man, it was a moment I will
What
never.
I did do, and he eventually begged me to stop. I didn't say a word to anybody. But everywhere we went, whether it was a cart girl or it was a code to get into the clubhouse or get into the golf course, I would tell the person on the other end, just tell them pound 14 or $14.
Oh, my
Eventually,
gosh.
It was great too, because I was 22 or 23, and I was young, stupid, no doubt. But he goes, "No, you got a 15. And I remember walking off the green. "No, I did not." And I started going through my shots. That was amazing, man.
That
good.
clip may have to be on social media.
Oh my gosh, we've had a lot of good moments over the years. I always say John's one of the most competitive people I've ever met. Where did that drive come from? Did it come because you talked about your parents were accordion?
Were they competitive accordion players? I mean, is that something that they?
It came from my dad, and he taught me a lot of things indirectly. First of all, he never let me win at anything. And so he never just said, "Here, we all have children and we want our children to experience greatness, but sometimes we go too far and they expect to win at everything, and then they start throwing their, tantrums." But he just said, and I remember the day when I finally beat him in games, or beat him in basketball, or beat him in ping pong. And I said, in myself, "You're never beating me again." And that competitive drive, he taught me not to be afraid to laugh, not to be afraid to make fun of myself, and to learn. And honestly, with the accordion, it really did teach me discipline. And that discipline was something that I took throughout my whole career so that I never winged it. You never just kind of, showed up and unprepared. And I say this because I wish every athlete could be a coach at some point before they become a professional. And I got the blessing of doing that. I coached basketball for 4 years. While I was in the minors, every offseason I came home and I coached basketball. And as competitive as I am, I wanted to teach character and discipline and doing it the right way. Like, I think we can win at all costs, and it feels good in the moment. But when you look back, what are we creating? Even at Kings Ridge, which I was a big part of, Kings Ridge Christian School, I kept pounding our athletic director to say, we need to create a culture that's infectious, that draws people to watch something and see it different. Because if we just look at the scoreboard, we can do that. We'll lose everything in between. We'll lose the character. How many people go like this when they score? And it's not about the jersey, even though it's about the school, and it's not about you. And so creating that culture all the way through, I wanted to do the right thing. And so as competitive as I am, and as much as I want to win, I'm always trying to find the right way to do it. And, I learned that from my dad. And as I navigated through baseball, we all know what baseball went through and did. And, I survived. That's the most proud I am of anything of my accomplishments. I survived that era and was never tempted to do anything. And kids don't have that choice sometimes through peer pressure. They're just kind of all thrown into a place to do this or do that. And if parents can create that culture, and especially if coaches can create that culture for kids, they'll survive it.
You talk about one of the new rules, pitch clock. I know both of us are excited being announcers. It's going to make the game go quicker, but how do you think that'll unfold as the year goes?
Well, I think the hardest challenge will be the hitters. And I've always said the pitch clock's not for the pitchers, it's for the hitters. Because the hitters have so much information they're processing, they want to slow the game down. There are some pitchers that are notoriously slow, and it is awful. But the game has been taught a slower way. So I can't blame the players because, again, the reward system has not changed the way they've played. So now the rules are going to change the way they have to play. And the reward system will eventually follow. And when I say a reward system, I'm basically saying how they get paid, right? So to chase a fly ball and hit a fly ball and strike out 200 times, if you're not penalized for that, then you're chasing the reward system. If you could take forever and play the game slower because you're not penalized for that, now the rules have caused the game to get back to a quicker pace. I think you're going to see it be way better, and players will always adjust. Players always adjust. You don't have to worry about the player adjusting to the rules. It's really the backlash of everybody else who watches the game that gets all bent out of shape when they see a rule change, and then eventually in time they'll go, oh wow, that was pretty good. When they change the field goal, the extra point to 30 or 40 yards, whatever it is, I bet you people thought, what? That's no big deal. Well, it ended up being a big deal. Yeah. Games are won and lost now on that, so now it was more exciting. Those intricacies in sports are always happening. Baseball has just been slow to making those changes.
John, you said you're a granddad now and you're going to start watching your grandkids play sports. What's one thing that as a granddad that you'll do differently in terms of counseling your grandkids that you did? Not to say you made a mistake, but just one thing differently you do your grandkids that you did your kids in terms of their sports experience.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. My kids used to always say, Dad, why don't you say anything in the stands? Because I never said a word. I would do the talking in the car on the way back or on the car on the way there, and I would have more conversations with my kid, my son or daughter, and I said, all I'm concerned about is you respect the sport and play the sport the right way. And that's kind of how I would view my grandson. Obviously, I'm living through a different prism, and get to live it in a as they say, you get to give your grandkids back as the joy of what they are. But I really can't wait to live through them and learn that, do I want to teach them whatever I can? I have a different responsibility than I did as a dad. I'm to come alongside my daughter and son-in-law and be there for my grandson. And I've already watched them play the 4-year-old basketball where they hop around and hop around and hop around and go in clumps. And, I'm sure, again, the differences they're going to have in the sports will come from some of the things my daughter learned probably under my house. And I'm going to help her. She asked me to help her teach the kids T-ball. So I'll do whatever I can to help this generation of kids kind of navigate a different way that sports is for them than it was for me.
Awesome. You're finishing up here, John. A few more questions for you. What is your biggest piece of advice for the young athletes watching?
Yeah, I mean, I think again that I'm big on failure. Don't be afraid to fail. I think if you can eliminate that aspect and the backlash that comes of that is so big, it causes never wanting to do it again, or that it secludes the young athlete. I think there's an opportunity to be, there's that ability to understand, like, okay, not everything, to use an analogy, you can't go for everything. And like golf, there's times to lay up, there's times to go. It's understanding that athlete and where they are in that space and time, and saying, if I want to be the best, then I have to be prepared every day to do something to the best of my ability. And that is a harder task when we're being watered down and being told different things. So the young athlete that shows up to practice and gets something out of practice, whatever that is, being better at something, having a purpose every single day in sports will serve you better than showing up and going through the motions just because you're gifted. And that the two don't always work together. The gifted athlete doesn't have the drive, and the non-gifted athlete has the drive. And how do you find that and package it and get that in both of them? So I think the biggest tip I give people is don't let failure define you. Let it be a motivator so that you can, because we have a measuring stick on everything in life. And if we allow that measuring stick to determine who we are and what we should be doing, then we're doing ourselves a disservice. Now, I'm not talking about, like, I've never ice skated or snow skied. I'm not going to challenge myself to go do that with never practicing. That would be foolish. But if you have a passion to do it, then if I wanted to all of a sudden be a snow skier with this broken down body, I better find a way to practice to do those things so that I'm not tumbling down the hill. So again, don't be afraid to fail and use that as a motivator to be great.
Final question, John. What is your best piece of advice to the coaches or the parents who are investing in these kids?
I think from a coach's standpoint is, how do you find a way to get the most out of that child and encourage that child in a way that it's not with kit gloves, but it's not with boxing gloves. It's finding a way to enhance that child to know that they're special, but not given a right to just do anything they want to do by just not showing up, right? It's the ultimate teacher. I love the coach mentality because you're coaching kids up. You're giving them an experience they would have never had that serves them well in life. Not all of them are going to go to college. You can't give them the talk that they're all going to college. They're all going to be professional athletes. But even as a parent, if you can come alongside your child, and as a parent, if you can provide an opportunity in a good area of passion, not a passion that determines some negative things, but if you can find the passion of your child in it that generally is good, and you can give them the opportunity to pursue that, they're going to turn out okay. If you force them in a passion, or you force them in an area that has a negative response, then usually they have negative responses from it. So, I say, like, fish, there's a lot of good sports and there's a lot of good activities. And if a young child has that passion, as a coach, if you can nurture that and you can give it as a parent the opportunity, the resources, man, it usually turns out great. But if you push them before they're ready, then they're going to have that outlook in life in a lot of areas. They're going to be resilient to criticism. Every word spoken is going to be a criticism instead of an opportunity to learn. And words are important, but words are also given to make and give that child the opportunity to be a better version of themselves as they navigate. So I love sports. I think we've taken it too far, but there are so many great lessons and life lessons in sports that parents and coaches can give, that if you just get a taste of it, a young child is going to be better off having experienced that than not.
Well, we know you got to get on the road, man, but we thank you for spending time with us today, John. Hey guys, Jeff Francoeur here. Thanks for checking out Pure Athlete, and subscribe to our channel on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you go to listen to our podcast.